whilst the biggest risk was saying yes to a totally different lifestyle, a whole adventure, actually, if I hadn't have said yes to that, I would never have, I would not at that point have sold my house. My husband wouldn't have quit his job to kind of back my career. We wouldn't have moved to the South Coast where all my family have congregated, and since then, people have died, people have had babies, life stuff has happened, COVID, and we were all together. So, yeah, saying yes to that and taking that risk has actually has shaped the last sort of 6 years of my life in the most positive way I could have imagined and asked for.
Welcome to another episode of Big Risk Energy. On this podcast, we talk to an amazing range of people. And we talk to these people about risk. Risk they've taken in their lives, risk they've taken in their careers, when they paid off and when they didn't. And on today's episode, I am blessed to be joined by the one and only Laura Price. Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
So Laura, this is your first ever podcast appearance, right?
It is my first ever podcast experience. So I'm really grateful that I've got you to hold my hand through it.
Yes.
And hopefully have a great conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Well, when did we speak? I think we connected for the first time 3-4 months ago.
Yeah, I'd say so. It's gone quickly. Yes, I think around that time.
I know, it's just impossible. I don't know about you, but since COVID, my ability to gauge how long ago things were just no longer exists.
I think that's a real thing. I've read things about that people literally, time has just stopped and people can't remember when things happened and how long things happened ago. So I think you're not alone in that at all.
Yeah, and I don't want to be controversial by any means here, but of the people that I know who are vaccinated, I was fully vaccinated, I got everything. So brain fog does seem to be one of the things that has come from that.
Or at least we can say that as we get older and can pretend it's something else.
Yes, I'm going to blame a vaccine rather than my aging, which actually makes me feel better about turning 32, so that's good.
Okay, well, I'm a little older than you. I blame my children, actually, quite frankly. I mean, it's all the other things I have to remember, like what Peppa Pig's brother's called and Roblox and Minecraft. So with all of that other information in my brain, I feel like that's contributing to the fog as well.
Yes, there's only so much storage space, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that really struck me when we did speak is obviously all the amazing brands that you've worked with and the fact that, you've worked with super established household names. You're also helping startups and entrepreneurs. But talking about the kids side, how do you manage it? Because that was what we were discussing just before we came on. For me, who is, no dependence, I can barely looking after myself, let alone other human beings. How do you manage that?
So I would say it's all about your support network. And actually, I think that's pretty much true for everybody, whether you've got kids, whether you've, whatever part of or stage in your life that you're at. If you want to be successful, I really think it's about your support network. Who do you have around you who can lift you up, who can keep you going? Because, so I'm quite unusual. So I have 2 children and a husband, and my husband is a stay-at-home dad. And that was a conversation that we had many years ago, because we had been through nannies and nurseries and all sorts of childcare, and it was all chaotic. So we sort of sat down and had a proper grown-up conversation, like, who wants to work, who doesn't, who wants to take this part on, who wants to take that part on. And I don't think that I would have been able to achieve everything that I've achieved if I hadn't had the cheerleaders in the background who, were picking up different parts of the rest of my life, actually. So yes, having a great support network, people who are your cheerleaders, who want you to do well because they know that if you're doing the stuff you enjoy, ultimately you're going to be a better mum, a better wife, a better friend, better daughter when you're, not kind of under the cosh for absolutely everything. So that would be my kind of number one reason for getting to where I've got to, I think.
Amazing. And did you always have that drive to say, no, I want to go as far as I can on the, professional side of things? Was that something you always set your mind to? Was it something which happened opportunistically? How did that really occur for you?
That's a great question. And I don't know if I've ever really sat down to think about it. I think I'm quite opportunistic. You start your career and you start in a company and I, as you said, I've worked for some amazing global brands. And you do your job and then you spot an opportunity and you do the next thing and you grow and you grow and you grow. And I've been very lucky. Well, I say lucky, maybe I've worked really hard, actually. I think women tend to do that, don't they? Oh, we've been very lucky. But actually, we've really grafted. I've really grafted.
Yeah.
And, every time the next opportunities come along, I've thought, okay, this feels right. And so I haven't had necessarily a sort of, I must be CEO of X by this point in my life. But, I enjoy the challenge of keep growing and keep learning and, finding places to work that really push me and challenge me to be the best I can be.
Super interesting. And how does it feel when, you are working for one of these global brands where it must be super stable, right? Super safe in terms of, the risk element, and then taking a massive risk and saying, well, actually, I want to push myself. I want to challenge myself. I'm going to jump ship. What goes through your mind at that time? How do you know whether it's the right decision to make? How do you assess that opportunity?
So I'd always worked in-house. And they got to a point where I was approached by a headhunter to go to the dark side, to the agency side. And, I'd always thought of myself as like an in-house person. I distinctly remember saying, early in my career, I don't know how agency people do it. I was living, breathing, eating, sleeping these brands. It was just everything in my life. And so I couldn't imagine how, friends of mine who worked in agencies, you're working with like 10 different clients. How on earth do you find the time to give your absolute all to each one? So I was convinced that I wasn't an agency person, but kind of when I got offered the role in an agency, actually I realised I'm already doing that. I'm already giving my attention to lots of different things. They might all be under one sort of, group company, but actually the individual brands are quite different. So I thought to myself, actually I feel like I've gone as far as I can within that company. And now I'm really ready to take everything I've learnt and actually apply it to different companies and different challenges. And so it was that sort of diversification that felt like it was the right time to take that step into, quite frankly, an unknown world. I mean, you work with agencies, but you don't work in them. So going from never having worked in one to being the managing director of a part of this agency was, it did feel like a risk, actually. Mitigated by the fact that this agency was, sort of listed on the New York Stock Exchange, a very big global brand in its own right. So there were certain elements of that I was like, well, I'm going to be comfortable with because it's not that different process, procedures, that type of stuff. But yeah, I felt like it was time to take a bit of a risk and step outside my comfort zone and really push myself to do something different.
Amazing. And how do you feel the transition period was from working with brands, which it's probably more about, bringing an existing brand to a new audience or reinforcing that, to maybe working with brands who are still in building stage, still trying to get presence, still trying to get awareness? And how much did you feel what you'd learned there was transferable, or is it a totally different kettle of fish when it comes to building a brand versus maintaining a global one?
I don't think it's an entirely different kettle of fish. I obviously specialise in digital communications. So ultimately, you're always looking at an audience-first approach. It's always about the audiences, and that is applicable whether you are a giant global brand or a startup. Who do you want to talk to? That's always the kind of starting point for me, is who do I want to talk to, and then where are they? Where can I reach them, and what do they want to hear from me about? So that helps you to start to shape your messaging, shaping your kind of marketing communications approach. Is this something that actually PR is going to be better for? Because right now, with the money that we have, we're not going to be able to do big budget advertising.
Sure.
But you know what? We can do some really, really interesting PR. We can get in touch with journalists. We can, start looking at it from that perspective. Or actually, should we be doing our own content? So can we use social media to kind of reach those people we want to reach? So it is ultimately probably where you get to in terms of your campaigns might be different, but the starting point for me is always the same.
So the principles are always consistent. That's really interesting. And how do you assess the social media landscape right now? Do you think it's more difficult than it was a few years ago? More opportunities? I mean, what's your take on state of play?
So I remember when I'm saying it like it was months ago, when Threads launched.
Yeah.
And I sort of, my social media manager community, everybody was just like, oh no, another one, another platform, because it started to feel a bit like that, is another platform that we need to be across. We need to understand how it works. We've got to learn another algorithm. We've got to get our heads around the analytics. Okay, that's not quite there yet with Threads, but it is really diverse. And I think it is challenging as a brand because you could put a lot of time, effort, money, resource into creating content, which, if your audience again isn't there, it could be a complete waste of time. So for me, the social media is so much part of what I do and has been since the very early days of my career, actually, before even paid advertising was a thing.
Yeah.
But it's a very complex landscape, and it's made to look very easy by a select few, and it's not easy. You can't just create stuff and bang it out there and hope for the best. You need strategy, you need plans. And like I say, you need to understand where your audience is because of the time that it can take. You need to invest in content creation.
So you're better off focusing on a desired audience rather than saying, well, let's just get as much reach as possible. And it's more actually about finding resonance with the right people rather than just vanity numbers, let's say.
You should have my job. That's beautifully put. No, it's exactly that. And I think it always has been. It's always been about resonance, and it's about... And that actually is one of the biggest challenges. And because especially in a global brand where big numbers, everybody likes big numbers because big numbers means big stuff's happening. Actually, my background was PR before I kind of got into the digital side of things. And, we're always about engagement in PR. It's always about relationships. So when I started with social media kind of 15 years ago, that's very much the approach I always took. It's about relationship building. And I still think that's key to it today, is how do you build those relationships? How do you come across as authentic and talk to audiences in a way that resonates with them? It doesn't always have to be about millions and millions and millions of likes, followers, whatever. If it's not the right type, if that audience isn't then going to go on to buy what you're selling or sign up to your service, it's meaningless. Exactly.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So in a PR context, building relationships, you mean more with journalists, I assume.
Yeah.
And then when you say building relationship on social media, that's direct with consumer, right? That's really interesting because it goes from a one-to-one and a bit dark arts to one-to-many and very much in public, I guess.
Yes, I think that's right. But then I guess there's the influencer side of social media as well, which is incredibly powerful. And, it's fun watching some people in my world talking about influencers like it's a brand new thing. No one's ever seen it before. Actually, it's pretty much the same as journalists. You're approaching somebody, you want them to write something, you've got to sell it into them, they've got to understand it. Now, obviously, there is a paid side of that with influencers, but that depends if you've got the cash. If you're a brand who's new to the space or startup, whatever, and you don't have hundreds of thousands of pounds to throw at every Love Island star on the planet, then actually you're going to have something that's really meaningful. And that goes back to that point of finding the influencers that are relevant to your audience. Actually, does their audience genuinely have an interest in what you're marketing? So finding those genuine connections and building those relationships are really important.
That's super interesting. I never thought about it that way in terms of the building relationship with the influencer side. And I remember in my previous business was a B2C brand called Real Sport, and one of our competitors, a company called Sports Lobster, had paid Ronaldo a couple million to I think it was provide a review in their app store bio description.
Yeah.
And this is back in like 2014,
right,
way before you could really measure the impact of that. And I remember it didn't really result in anything. So it's been so interesting to see how the infrastructure has developed in a way that allows influencer marketing to be really powerful. Whereas I feel like it used to be a bit more
Wild West.
Yeah, a little bit more Wild West, right?
Yeah.
And do you think we're still in the Wild West for social media, or is it now just it is what it is, and these are the rules, and this is the infrastructure?
No, I don't think we'll ever be in a place where necessarily this is the rules and everybody plays by them. You're always spotting new things happening. You're seeing new trends. Obviously, for a lot of these influencers, this is their job, and their income relies on them getting these brand partnerships through the door and being paid for them. So, I recently came across something called podding, which is where influencers are kind of using each other's networks to up their engagement.
Okay,
and so
yep.
How do you, as a brand, make sure that, again, it's about that genuine audience connection, that you're not signing up somebody who, on the face of it, looks absolutely perfect, but then when you dig into their audiences, that's not the engagement that's coming from isn't necessarily all genuine, actually people who care. So I still think there's always going to be people who, and it's relentless. I mean, imagine having to show up every single day, be perfect, be on point, create
it's
that
tough.
kind of,
I find it so difficult.
Right?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things in my job. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm very happy that I'm behind the scenes and I don't have to do it, but it must be relentless. So you can appreciate that, there's people try to find shortcuts. That happens in every aspect of business, right? Shortcut to try and find, to keep things going, to maintain momentum.
Yes.
So, I don't think we'll necessarily ever have a situation where everybody's, playing by the rules. But I think the platforms have done, and advertising standards are doing a good job at, making sure that there's transparency around when things are paid for, when they're not, because that is really important as well. So people understand it. And I think people are very comfortable now with seeing people they admire having #ad. But it's good that we've got that kind of process in place. So you do have more of a genuine understanding of what they actually like as an influencer and what they've just been paid to tell you they like.
Absolutely. Super interesting. Question that I want to ask you, which I think will be really relevant for our audience here, is what do you see the role of founder or CEO, marketing, content, social engagement versus from company official channels? How important is it? How aligned does it have to be? Because I think it's one of the things which a lot of founders struggle with is, building a personal brand, doing the building in public thing where they're trying to be very honest, but then you've got to appear as the polished final product through official channels. How do you assess that?
So I'm very in favour of CEO comms. A lot of CEOs will work with their comms team or a PR agency to help them get profiling in the media. And that's really, really important. But I do think social media plays a big role too. Again, it goes back to the audience thing. Like, where are the audience? And LinkedIn has become, obviously, the channel of choice for this. And actually, LinkedIn's great. It is really powerful, and it does have a big impact, or it certainly can have if you do it well. There's some stats that we're looking at recently where an individual's post will get 8 times more engagement than the same kind of post on a corporate channel.
Okay.
So it's really worth it. People like people. People like to see stuff from people. It's less of that kind of, I'm talking to a corporate wall. So there is a real opportunity for CEOs to lean into that. It's not easy to do because, like anything on social media, it takes a strategic approach. It takes consistency.
Yes, it takes a lot of time.
You can't sort of open the doors and then be like, can't. I'm too tired today.
Yes, and that's never a really good trait in a founder as well.
They need to show up all the time and bring that energy. But it's a huge opportunity to be transparent about the business. So depending on who you're talking to, so for example, whether you are a big global brand and you're talking to your investors, FTSE 100s, really great opportunity to tell them things all the time, to build that equity story, because obviously there are key moments within a financial calendar, your results or whatever, annual report, where that's the set pieces. But actually investors are using like digital channels more than they ever have before. So if you can drip feed, news about your company, things you're working on, the progress you're making, again, whether you're Series A, Series B, wherever you are in that journey, it's a brilliant opportunity to just constantly be showing progress and what you're working towards.
Amazing. Super valuable. Thank you for that. One question I have for you. Surely the pressure that you're under when you're working for global brands where you are, the mouth in that sense, must be tough. Do you get used to that? Any horror stories you want to share?
Is it tough? You obviously get used to it, and anyone who's sensible isn't putting, although we have seen in the past people who've put interns in charge of the social media channels and all hell's broken loose, or at least that's the way they've positioned it. So you're not, you obviously, as you step on in your career, then you become more accustomed to that pressure. Look, working for big companies means big sign-off processes. So you're rarely alone in my world, just left to your own devices to say something. This is always going to be a very long sign-off process for everything that goes out. So broadly speaking, you feel quite protected by that process because, the accountability is shared, shall we say. But I think, working in-house means you are very close to the messaging. You are, in theory, living, breathing, eating, sleeping that brand. So you've got a very good sense of how to say things, what they should say, where are the red flags. That's obviously more of a challenge when you're agency side because you are working across lots of different companies. But I think, again, that's why where choosing the agency you want to work with very carefully is important, because, you know, having people who understand the risks involved and having a very open dialogue with your agency about, you know, and allowing them to come to you and say, you know what, I think this is a risk. I'm not sure we should be saying this, and being open to that conversation is really important. So yeah, it's about, I guess, relationships and the transparency that you can bring to those.
Amazing. Okay, super useful. One question I have for you is, you've obviously worked on a ton of award-winning campaigns. What is the secret to building a successful campaign, and how do you define success?
I guess success is defined by the business you're working for, what you're trying to achieve with that campaign. A recent one that I worked on when I was at Blackstone, that was very much a reputation building campaign. So Blackstone's obviously a giant brand. It's certainly very well known in the US, a little bit less so perhaps in Europe and the UK. So we were very focused on doing that brand building piece. You know, Blackstone has a very different model to a lot of other private equity businesses, and the investments they're making and the businesses they're looking to invest in are incredibly interesting, certainly maybe from an ESG perspective. They do some incredible work in the life sciences space as well. So when we were creating this campaign, which was all about investing in the future of Europe and how Blackstone's investments really contribute to, you know, a better future for everybody, we went to one of the companies where they were doing all their R&D in the labs, and they're helping to cure blood cancer.
Amazing.
It was incredible. It was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. You know, I go and create content and videos and strategies and messaging, and these guys were genuinely curing cancer. And that's where you realize when a brand like Blackstone is doing really important work, because without that level of investment,
it just doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you had all these incredible researchers just, you know, they were some of them were just finished sort of university, and they were doing the most important work. And yeah, it was incredible to create a campaign that really had that type of work at the heart of it. So again, I mean, you know, in terms of what success looks like, well, it's your objectives, right? And in that perspective, we really wanted to open people's eyes to the type of investments that Blackstone were making. And I think, you know, we did that. I think you've got to look at all your different channels. You're going to have a set of KPIs. That's pretty standard stuff, I guess. But, you know, ultimately, are you shifting the dial? You know, have you improved what, you know, we set out to improve awareness of the Blackstone brand. Did we do that? Yes. We also looked at favorability. You know, we had very specific audiences for this campaign, but we wanted to you know, to make sure at the end of it, you know, it was running for sort of 9 months. Okay. Had we actually moved the needle in terms of awareness, but also favorability? So, because people have those perceptions of private equity, you know,
of course, yeah.
It is quite challenging as an industry for lots of reasons, but you know, had we managed to change people's perceptions of Blackstone in Europe? And the answer was yes.
Amazing.
So always make sure you've got some data at the start and data at the end, so you know whether you've made a difference. It's
so key, right? Measurability, right? Because otherwise it's just, it might have had an amazing impact, but unless you can quantify that, it's very difficult. And I think it's a really important lesson for startups, because often they're doing great things or feel like they're doing great things, but actually unless you're able to reliably understand the impact, it's impossible to know whether it's worth investing again. So another really valuable lesson for startups as well. So thank you for that. Okay, I've got a few questions that I ask every guest that I'd love to, not quick fire or anything. What's the single biggest risk you've ever taken, and what was the outcome?
So the single biggest risk I've ever taken, certainly from a professional perspective, was to say yes to moving to Houston.
Wow. Okay.
So I had got a new job. And I was on my 3-month notice periods. To anyone listening, 3-month notice periods are terrible. Don't ever put those in place. Nobody wants to be hanging around a company for 3 months. But during these 3 months, the company I was leaving went on a little bit of a kind of mission to help keep me.
Okay.
And so one of the things that they came to me with as a way of keeping me there was saying, why don't we move you to the States and you can take over like the digital part of our North American business.
Okay.
I mean, that's an incredible opportunity. It was big. And my children were 1 and 3 at the time. So I was like, you know what? They can go. This is all good. So we talked about Houston because, you know, lots of people move over that side of the pond. Not always to Houston. We spent some time there and we were like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's go on this big adventure. I'm going to turn down the job that I just accepted with the other company and we're going to stay with this one and we're going to go to Houston.
Wow.
And that involved my husband leaving his job. We sold our house. We packed up all of our stuff and we were kind of ready to go. And then a big hurricane hit Houston. And so about a month before we were due to go, I get a phone call saying, I mean, you can't come. There's nowhere for you to live. Because every house that was spare had gone to people who'd lost their homes in the hurricane. The whole thing was underwater. So we were like, okay, we'll just stay here then.
Yeah.
And the net result of that moment was that we never went to Houston because we ended up moving down to the South Coast because we bought a little place there just to hang on to while we were away in America. We moved in and we've never left. We still live in our little holiday home that we bought at the time. And whilst the biggest risk was saying yes to a totally different lifestyle, a whole adventure, actually, if I hadn't have said yes to that, I would never have, well, say never, I would not at that point have sold my house. My husband wouldn't have quit his job to kind of back my career. We wouldn't have moved to the South Coast where all my family have congregated, and since then people have died, people have had babies, people, you know, life stuff has happened, COVID, you know, and we were all together. So yeah, saying yes to that and taking that risk has actually has shaped the last sort of 6 years of my life in the most positive way I could have imagined and asked for.
Wow, that's incredible. That's an amazing story.
Yeah.
And have you found since then, have you had an urge to think, oh, do you know what, maybe I would pack up, start again, try a different place? Does that feel like something, you know, still unfinished? Or
do you know what? One of the best things to come out of it was the cathartic process of throwing out all the junk. It was wonderful. All those things you think you need, it turns out you don't actually need any of them. So because we got rid of everything and we were sort of living this slightly weird existence of like, we're now in our holiday home with a skeleton staff.
Begin again.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I've never sort of thought, okay, I'm wedded to this life now. Like if the opportunity came up again, you know, I'd love to live overseas and do something. I'm up for adventure. It was really a great moment because you think at this point in my life with the kids and school, actually I would be the opposite to that. But I think we're very much in that headspace, you know, we're kind of open to it. So taking one risk has given us the opportunity and the appetite to take more.
That's great. Inspirational. Genuinely. It really is. That's amazing to hear. Okay, my next one for you is, what are you proudest of?
What am I proudest of? My resilience. That might sound like a really selfish answer.
No.
I probably should have said my children. I am proud of them.
We can make 2 edits.
Okay, great. Yeah. I'm really proud of my resilience. It's something that isn't... it's not a characteristic that everybody has. It's not something that comes naturally to everybody.
Sure.
But I think it's something that I have developed over the course of, you know, certainly kind of a good 20 years. And it's something that I am really proud of because not everybody has it. You know, I think it serves me incredibly well every day because obviously life happens every day and I back myself to get through whatever it throws at me now.
Amazing. I think there's so much to be said for that mindset mentality because I think genuinely to a resilient mind, you can't be beaten. They're just obstacles to go around. Right? If you know that you're going to be able to get from A to B to C and know that life happens and things along the way, it's just about the perseverance and the time to figure out how to get around that hurdle. Yeah. Right?
Exactly.
Anything you wish you did differently?
No. And the reason I say that with, you know, such clarity is that I am not a believer in the wrong decisions. I believe every decision you make is the right one at that time. You can't make a wrong decision because at the time you weighed it up and I'm a Libra, by the way, for anybody who's listening,
me
who's
too.
in. Okay, so as Librans, we are very good at pros and cons, and we balance everything. And so, for me personally, I haven't made any wrong decisions. They were the right decisions at that exact moment. So, if I'd have I wouldn't have done anything differently, because I feel like I've always made the right decisions at the right moment.
That's great. And ultimately, we wouldn't be where we are today without them.
Exactly.
And me and Kobe were talking about this earlier today. I genuinely believe that what at the time might feel like the worst decisions we've ever made will ultimately become the best, because they're always tied to an end, or getting something wrong and destroying an opportunity, a relationship, whatever it might be. Ultimately, it opens the doors to growth and so many more opportunities. So I totally agree with you on that one.
Yeah, I think the universe has a plan.
Yes.
And sometimes you don't always know what the plan is. And sometimes things happen where you're like, just why? I just don't understand why this is happening to me at this time. But you sort of have to have faith. And that might be religion, it might not be. But faith is so important that actually the universe will see you right.
Yes.
You're a good human, it'll see you right. And actually, ultimately, as you say, another door will open, and then you look back and you'll be like, that's why I went through that at the time.
And I think the point you make about being a good human is so key, because genuinely, the energy you put out is the energy you'll get back. Yeah. And I agree, when you go through those tough moments, being able to stay forgiving, being able to stay open-minded, being able to stay positive will serve you so well, and things will come your way. Yeah. And then these are the sorts of messages that we love to get out from this podcast. Absolutely. Okay, my last one for you is 15-year-old Laura walks in the room right now. What are you telling her?
Okay, Laura's walked in. Listen more. I feel like I was one of those kids. I'm still one of those kids who has got an opinion on pretty much everything. And but I think I should have listened more, because I've learned over the years to not jump in with everything that I want to say first, because actually by listening for longer, it might change what you thought your opinion was. So yes, I think my 15-year-old self would benefit greatly from somebody just saying, just slow down, listen to someone else, then come up with because I think quickly, my brain works in overdrive. And I see, even now it's something I actively tell myself every day. Like, we're in brainstorms, we're in account team meetings, and I've got something to say, and I hold myself back. I'm like, just wait, because you have to think, your brain's gone there, but just hear what other people have got to say, because your brain might go a different way. Yeah. So yes, that would definitely be my advice to myself.
It's great advice, and I think there is so much to be said about trying to stay present, especially with a busy mind where, it's excitement, it's, great intentions of wanting to get it all out. But yes, as you said, it's and it's always an interesting challenge for me on the podcast. It's like, especially with ADHD, it's like, oh, that was an amazing point. There's something I really want to say, and I know I will probably forget it, but you're right. As the point goes on, it might change. Laura, thank you so much. Anything you want to plug? Where can people find you?
Well, so I'm a partner, as you said, at Pagefield. We are an integrated communications agency based in Soho. We work across all different sectors. So if anybody needs any help with their PR, their political engagement, or some social media, give me a shout.
Amazing. Laura, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching the episode. And if you haven't subscribed, please hit subscribe below so that you can support the podcast and we can keep on bringing you amazing new guests. If you want to see the other amazing episodes in this podcast, click into our series section. As ever, if there are any other guests or topics you want us to explore, just let me know in the comments and we'll do our best to bring someone in.